сольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое, синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи и дыши, и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. И каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается.
While we were in Kyiv, we decided to visit the Holodomor Victims Memorial Museum. We interviewed the guide of the National Museum and historian Tetyana Soproniuk, who kindly answered our questions regarding these horrible events in the history of Ukraine, especially as they relate to the linguistic situation and how these events affected people, their culture, language, and ways of life. Good morning, my name is Perea, so I am a lecturer of linguistics at Sucholminsky National University of Mykolaiv, and we're continuing with our research about the linguistic situation in Ukraine. And today I feel honored to be at the Holodomor Victims Memorial. And we're going to be interviewing somebody who is very knowledgeable about the history of the Holodomor, and we're going to cover this part, so I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Tetyana Soproniuk, and I'm the tour guide of the National Museum Holodomor Victims Memorial.
Thank you.
If we speak about the Holodomor, it is necessary to understand that, first of all, this is the genocide of Ukrainian nation, and the genocide does not just happen, do not just happen. They are the result of some causes and preconditions. That is why, if we speak about the Holodomor, we have to start not from 1932-1933, when actually it happened, but from a bit earlier period of time, from 1928, when the policy of collectivization was proclaimed in the Soviet Union. Collectivization means uniting individual private farms, combining individual private farms into large farms of collective property. Ukrainian farmers didn't want to enter these collective farms because they didn't want to share everything with everyone. They didn't want to give their property, tools, cattle, domestic animals into the collective property. And that is why they started to rebel. So this was a serious rebellious movement. For example, in 1930 only, there were about several thousand rebellions, and the participants of these rebellions were about 1 million people.
Wow, okay.
So this was a huge rebellious movement, and these rebellious farmers were the real danger to the Soviet Union territorial integrity. So it was the danger that someday they will realize that they can create their own independent state. They can be independent from Moscow. And that is why Stalin used the genocide, the weapon of famine, to stop this resistance, to suppress it, and just to destroy Ukrainians as a nation. So because they were dangerous, he was trying to turn Ukrainians into typical Soviet nation, and destroying of Ukrainian nation is closely connected with Russification. So it was parallel process, because as we see from the censuses, for example, we see that mostly people who were changing their native language, they were mostly changing it to the Russian. So not to Yiddish or Polish, but to the Russian, because it was the language of the authorities, the language. It was often thought as more prestigious. And just this way, people were sometimes. People were just changing the language they speak in.
I see.
But if you speak about the Holodomor, so how did it happen? We were speaking about the the rebellions. And in 1931, the authorities collected 39% of the harvest as a tax, as the grain procurement plan. So the Soviet Union had the command type of economy. It means that each year a plan was created, and people were forced to complete this plan before they were allowed to leave something for themselves. So they desired they were starving in 1932. In winter of 1932, they were already starving. So because the balance, the bread balance, the grain balance was broken. Later, in March of 1932, the authorities released the grain procurement plan for the year 1932. And this grain procurement plan is impossible to be completed. It's just too high. When the harvest was collected, of course, it is not completed. People didn't have enough seeds to sow and to collect such harvest. And later, they released the decree according to which the plan should be completed by any means. And this any means included a lot of things. For example, in August, on the 7th of August of 1932, the decree, which is more commonly known as the Law on 5 Heads of Grain, was released. So outside our museum, we have the monument, the girl who holds 5 heads of grain, and this is important symbol of this event. So according to this decree, all the property of these collective large farms was proclaimed to be the state property. So everything was just nationalized. And when the farmers were trying to collect something from the fields, they were treated as thieves. This was treated as embezzlement of state property. And the criminal punishment for doing this is 10 years of imprisonment or killing at the scene of the crime. So, and a lot of people became victims just because they were trying to collect this single heads of grains, leftovers. No one needed them, so but they were treated as thieves because it was thought as. So this was the state property; you couldn't touch it.
I see.
Later, in November, they released this famous decree, and according to this decree, as I said, the plan had to be completed by any means. This any means included confiscations, searches, so-called red brigades or confiscating brigades were created in each village, and these red brigades were confiscating not just wheat, not just simple, not just the wheat they needed to complete the plan. They were confiscating, meat, fruit, vegetables, milk, cheese, just every food possible. Sometimes they were confiscating like the linen, the clothes, the furniture. Also, the mean of natural fines was used. A natural fine means that, for example, if the farm had not complete grain procurement plan, it would have paid the natural fine, which means that at first this was the meat, but the amount of wheat, like the meat norma for 15 months.
I see. Wow.
But later, this wasn't just meat. This was just everything: milk, fruit, vegetable, potatoes, like Ukrainian salos, or everything. And these bread brigades were doing confiscations. Also, later in January, I have forgotten the most important thing. In December of 1932, according to one of the decrees, the policy of black lists or black boards was implemented in Ukraine and in Kuban. So this is important. So it wasn't implemented anywhere else. Blacklisting means that the Red Brigade came inside the village and they confiscated just everything. Later, they and the military forces surrounded the village. No one is able to get out of it. No one is able to get inside of it. inside the village, so it was kind of ghetto, kind of
Yes.
social reservation.
I see.
And this blockade lasted for several weeks or sometimes even months.
Wow, okay.
And of course, this was one of the most horrible weapons used against Ukrainian farmers. In January, they forbidden to cross the border of Ukraine, not
Okay.
just with Poland or Romania, because the borders with this country were guarded strictly. From the very beginning, they closed the borders with Russia and with Belarus, and people lost the chance to get abroad to exchange their private belongings for food or to get some job there. Also, they closed the entrances to big cities.
Okay.
The person needed a special permit to enter the big city. Also, they implemented the passport regime, which means that if buying the tickets for the transport, if one wanted to board the train or the ship, the person needed the passport. But in the Soviet Union, the farmers didn't have passports, and they were not allowed to use public transport. And of course, the blackboards. So these were the means used against the Ukrainian farmers.
I see.
That is why these decisions of fall of 1932 and winter of 1933, they led to the climax of the Holodomor in spring and summer of 1933. So it was the most horrible period of time. People were dying by whole families, by villages. They had nothing to eat. And later, how did the Holodomor end? So the Soviet Union realized that someone had to process the land, someone had to plant the food, and the farmers received some amounts of food products. Later, they were forced to give these products back, so it was kind of credit. So they were given this food like credit to survive the winter of 1933 and 1934. But the problem is that people were still dying in 1934 as well of problems caused by this long-term famine. So it influenced by long-term starvation. So it causes huge damage to the human health, and the person dies in a few years. The person could be dead because he or she suffers from these problems.
I see. So this blockage was made essentially to the entire country, right? So nobody could get in or out, or specific areas?
So the specific villages, but for example, downstairs, that way we have the blackboard alley where you can see the numbers of the number of the village and the names of the villages which were blacklisted, and this is the huge number. And the causes for blacklisting the village were mainly two. The first one is if the village didn't complete the grain procurement plan, the grain quota. It was too high, so a lot of the villages didn't complete it. On the other hand, the other cause was just if the village was very rebellious. So if the village participated in rebellions, it was punished as well. Sometimes the cause for blacklisting the village was even the historical past of the village. For example, if the village had completed the plan, if they were not rebellious, but in the past the inhabitants of the village supported the Ukrainian Central Council, this so-called Perea movements, as it was called in the Soviet documents, they were also punished by this blacklisting. So like provincially, to prevent. They were blacklisted as well, and this was really a huge number, several hundreds, even several thousands, I would say.
Wow.
Outside Ukraine, the Holodomor also touched the Kuban region. It is the northern Caucasus. It was the ethnical Ukrainian territory. It was inhabited by Ukrainians mainly, at least for a half. And they were suffering as well. So the weapons I have mentioned, closed borders, blackboards or blacklists, this passport regime, they were used in Kuban as well. The other territories of the Soviet Union which were starving were Lower Volga region, Tatarstan, Kazakhstan, and Bashkortostan. So these famines are not recognized as the genocide. So they were not aimed against, for example, especially the famine in Lower Volga was not aimed against Russians as nationality. It was impossible because the Russian nationality was the major in the Soviet Union, so it wasn't logical to punish them doing this. But the Ukrainians were the object of the genocide. Stalin once said, I have just the quote, not to be mistaken. What is this way? That the nationality problem is in its very essence the problem of the farmers. So just this way, the majority of Ukrainians were farmers. The majority of farmers were Ukrainians. But this doesn't mean that the cities were not suffering. So the cities suffered.
They also suffer. I see.
Well. The number of the victims is 7 to 10 million people.
10 million people.
So it is a really huge number. It was like 1/3 to 1/4 part of Ukrainian population.
1/4 of the population. Wow, that's a lot.
National minorities, so they were suffering as well, but for example, if we speak about villages, in many cases, according to Professor Vasilenko, I refer to his article, he says that in many cases the representatives of national minorities were the part of Ukrainian nation. So it was. So we do not speak about the monocentrous. So they were the part of this Ukrainian community, Ukrainian, Ukrainian citizens, like this way. They were suffering as well. So to solve this problem, we need to compare this to the Holocaust. So this comparison tells us a lot. For example, during the Holocaust, not only Jews were destroyed, the same in Ukraine. So the Jews and the Jews were the target of the Holocaust. The Ukrainians were the target of the Holodomor. This doesn't mean that the other nationalities didn't suffer. From just this way, they were not the aim. They were not the target group, but they suffered as well because they just lived here. They just lived in Ukraine. They became the innocent victims as well as 7 million Ukrainians.
I see. So there could have been probably religious minorities which were part of Ukraine also. So
we don't speak about the religious minorities. So the communists were fighting with the religion as such. So in our museum we have the exhibition now, which is called "The Church Defending the National and the Christian," and we say that I will be referring to the Raphael Lemkin's article, "The Soviet Genocide in Ukraine." So this article is important when we speak about literature, about language, and about religion as well. So, according to Lemkin, he says that the genocide was not just the Holodomor. So it was one. So he speaks about 4 attacks against Ukrainian population. So the first attack was the Holodomor, the destruction of the farmers who were the basis of Ukrainian identity. They were preserving Ukrainian culture, traditions. They were like holding it. They knew what it was to be the Ukrainian. But at the same time, they were destroying the Ukrainian church. So they were destroying the church as such. So Lenin, if I'm not mistaken, said that the religious is the opium to the people. But the Ukrainian church was suffering like double because it was the church and it was the Ukrainian church. Also, it is important that a lot of Ukrainian national leaders were from the clergy or from the families of clerics.
I see.
So especially if we speak about the 19th century, so Ukrainian clerics families gave this Ukrainian Renaissance.
I see.
but so the church was destroyed as well. Ukraine. So there were the attempts to get the autocephaly of the church. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful because when the minister came to Istanbul, to Constantinople, to get Tomos, the word which is spoken much in Ukraine nowadays, there was no patriarch because it was the vacant place. So the previous patriarch died.
I see.
There was not the next, but then the Bolsheviks conquered Ukraine.
Yeah.
And so if there is no separate Ukrainian state, there could be no Ukrainian separate church. That is why this attempt was not successful. But they destroyed Ukrainian church. So maybe while you were walking to our museum, you should have seen the Hotel Salute. So a strange building.
Yes.
The masterpiece of Soviet architecture, and this hotel and the palace of children and youth nearby. So over these two buildings there was the St. Nicholas Military Cathedral, and this was the cathedral where the liturgy was first conducted in Ukrainian language.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
And to destroy the memory, of this building where the liturgy was done in Ukrainian, they destroyed it and they built their hotel, their like children center.
I see.
So there is no memory of this cathedral nowadays. It's this way. The third attack, according to Raphael Lemkin, was the attack against language. This is important. And the Holodomor and the language are connected. For example, there is the decree, which was released on the 14th of December of 1932, and which is called on grain procurements in Ukraine, Northern Caucasus, and in the Western region. According to this decree, so it tells us about the grain procurement, that that the farmers in these regions are sabotaging the grain procurements, that the plan had been completed by any means, and so on. But at the same time, they speak about the mistakes in Ukrainianization. So you know what the word Ukrainian. So in the early 20th, there was the period of Ukrainianization, and the year 1932-33 were end of this Ukrainianization. So the documents in Kuban region, according to this decree, were should have been. So according to this decree, it was said that the documents should be written in Russian. So we have to fight these mistakes in Ukrainianization. We have to stop it because we have to work with the Ukrainian Bolsheviks. We have to bring them up in a more in some other way because we were mistaken and so on. And this is the interesting thing, that the documents of Ukrainian Communist Party in 1932 they were in Ukrainian. But the documents of 1933 they are in Russian. So this was like a very, very important moment. And everything was Russificated. In 1933, they released the new orthography, which made Ukrainian language much more closer to the Russian one. Also, they killed a lot of Ukrainian scholars who were creating the terminology. The terminology is important thing. The dictionaries. Who also in 1930s the Institute of Ukrainian Language was destroyed. So they were doing this at the same time, and according to Lemkin, so this was at the same time the attack, the part of the genocide, and also one other attack, the fourth attack against Ukrainian population, was the attack against Ukrainian intelligentsia. We have the so-called stroke and Renaissance. Stroke and Renaissance generation, so Ukrainian writers, artists, who who appeared during this Ukrainianization, who were creating their own culture. And when the Soviet Union realized that this is a separate culture, that they are strong, they determine themselves.
Yes.
Self-determined culture. They decided to destroy it, and during the early 30s, a lot of Ukrainian, so the whole Ukrainian stroke and Renaissance generation is lying in Siberia, in Sandermoch.
I see.
They were just killed. Some of them committed suicide. Some of them, the leader of the Ukrainianization, Skripnik, committed suicide. Mykola Khvelyovy, famous Ukrainian writer, also committed suicide. But this was this is connected with the Holodomor, because it was the simultaneously, because the rebellious movement of Ukrainian farmers was not some organized national liberation movement.
Yes.
But they realized that Ukrainian intelligentsia could lead these
Be
people.
a factor to overthrow or to cause
problems. In some time there will be the leader.
Yes.
And so that is why to prevent this, they just destroyed everything. So Lemkin, the author of the term genocide, he sees genocide in a larger way, not just physical destruction of farmers, but these three items.
So language and also
intellectual and church.
They were organizing it, and
there could be no answer.
No answer.
At the local level, at the small, like this, in the small village council, sometimes people are trying to save their whole villagers. They are like the people. The people they ruled over. They were trying to write to the higher authorities to ask to lower the plan, or just to inform. Sometimes they were thinking that the higher authorities do not know what is happening, and they say like, we are starving, help us. And these people were called the servants of kulaks. Kulaks were the class of rich farmers, not just rich, but actually independent farmers that should have been destroyed, and they actually were destroyed. And they were called the servants of kulaks. They were called. It was said that they were sabotaging the grain procurement, and they were just repressed as well as their farmers. Sometimes we have the stories when, for example, the head of the collective farm was trying to help the other people, but it was the personal choice. The Holodomor is a great story of personal existential choice, I would say.
I see.
It is whether you choose to be the victim or to be the prosecutor.
Exactly, yeah.
Just this way, and sometimes it was a really difficult choice. For example, if the person was asked to join the brigade, which will be doing confiscations, this is really difficult. If you refuse, you would be repressed.
Yes.
If you do not refuse, you are making confiscation from the houses of your neighbors.
Yeah.
This is not okay. So this is the question to think about.
I see. So essentially, could we say that the local government, and by local meaning the government inside Ukraine somehow were trying to help?
Not inside Ukraine, because the Ukrainian Communist Party. So if we speak about that, the Stalin was the film director of this. So his colleagues in Ukraine, so we were his puppets. This way. But this was not happening like everywhere. This wasn't happening very often. But we know the cases when the person realized that I am human. I have to help someone.
Yes.
But this was not happening like everywhere. This wasn't happening often.
Yeah.
But we know the stories.
I see. Interesting.
The main language. So it depends
what sphere we're speaking about. So if we speak about the farmers, I have the statistics according to the data of the census of 1926, a few years before the Holodomor. We have the information that the farmers, the inhabitants of rural areas, who named them Ukrainians, who were ethnically Ukrainians, they named, 96% of them named their native language as Ukrainian, so almost everyone. If we speak about ethnical Ukrainians in the cities, only 74% of ethnical Ukrainians in the cities chose their native language as Ukrainian. So the rest of them chose almost all other Ukrainians who lived in the cities chose their native language as Russian.
Okay.
If we speak about the years before the Holodomor, so in 1923 the policy of Ukrainianization was proclaimed. So in whole the Soviet Union it was called Koreanization, like rooting into the local cultures, languages, to root the ideas, the communist ideas.
Okay.
So they made one step back to do two steps forward.
I see.
Like this way. And they all the documents, all the official documents were written in Ukrainian. The officials were forced to speak Ukrainian, to learn it.
Okay.
Very often they didn't want to do that, but because there is interesting also statistics that it is the later statistics that, but it is very symptomatical that in the communist, at the same time in 1924 there were only 33% of Ukrainians in the Communist Party of Ukraine. So the members of the Communist Party, only 33% of them were Ukrainians. And if you speak about the members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine, the Bolsheviks, only less than 16% of them were Ukrainians.
I see.
So the Communist Party of Ukraine, and only 16% of them are Ukrainians, but they were forced to learn Ukrainian. Later, in 1926, this policy is is made to be a bit slower. So there are some changes, but the most important, the change is 1932-1933, the same time as the Holodomor. They just stopped Ukrainianization, and the Russification started instead. Later, there was the decree according to which that Russian language is compulsory for study in all non-Russian schools. Just this way, and they were forced to study Russian, and the number of Ukrainian schools was just decreasing.
I see.
And as I said, this is very symptomatic that the end of the Ukrainianization in Kuban and the grain procurements are included in the same decree. So they were thinking of this farmers' movement and of the farmers' movement and of the national movement at the same time. The problem is that they realize that Ukrainians are how is it called? They were ready for independent life. They were ready for sovereign life, and that is why they were afraid that this Ukrainianization will lead to the process of a separation of Ukraine, and then these farmers' rebellions. That is why they stopped Ukrainianization. So the first, as I said, the first cases of lowering the tempos of Ukrainianization were in 1926, and the Russian period, the period of great change was 1932-1933. Also the thing I was also speaking about is that when the Holodomor happened, the whole houses were empty, the whole villages were empty, and the Soviet Union authorities resettled people from the other Soviet republics into these houses, into these villages. And these were not ethnically Ukrainians.
I see.
And these regions, the regions where these people were resettled to were Odessa, Kharkiv, Donetsk, and Dnipro region.
Okay.
Dnipropetrovsk region. And in these regions, Russian language was implemented. There was the Russification, like in order to help these resettles to adapt to their non-Russian environment, and this was the covering of the process of actual Russification, of extra Russification of these territories. So it was also connected. Speaking about the language restrictions, in the decree in the decree which was released on the 14th of December of 1932, it is said that Ukrainian language shouldn't be used in the official documents and at official level in Kuban. And starting from 1933, Ukrainian language is no longer used in Ukrainian official documents, in the party documents. Where sometimes we can find the documents in Ukrainian, but the majority of them are in Russian. Russian language is implemented to be taught in all non-Russian schools. So the Ukrainian theater, Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian culture their number is increasing. At the same time, they are destroying the orthography, destroying the dictionary, destroying the scientific terminology, making it closer to the Russian one. And this was the same idea. The idea was the same, so it was a bit different idea. So the idea of the language restrictions of the 19th century was that there is no Ukrainian language, this is the dialect of Russian. And during this genocide, the idea was that to make actually Ukrainian the dialect of Russian. Probably they realized it is not. But they were trying to make it as close to the Russian language because if it is the choice between two words, one is authentically Ukrainian, one is also authentically Ukrainian but closer to sounds the same as in Russian language. They prefer the second variant because it is closer to the Russian language. And the orthography of 1933 is also one of the ways of committing the genocide, and people who are trying to make Ukrainian language independent, who are creating, writing dictionaries and terminology. They were destroyed physically. They were just killed or imprisoned in Siberia in a few years. This was also the attack. The attack on language is connected with the attack. So in the villages people were still, so nevertheless Ukrainians survived, nevertheless Ukrainian language survived in the villages, it survived in some cities,
I see.
So despite so we survived not due to but despite something. But so it was strong. But the problem is that the whole generation of writers, poets was
destroyed.
So some of them were living. So some just were here. They were if you speak Russian, you feel no discomfort. If you speak Ukrainian, you feel it.
I see.
And they were not feeling any discomfort. Sometimes they realized that if you live here, if you have any farm, you have to work, and they were not ready for this.
I see.
They came back. They just lived here doing their work, so they were just Russificating. So they had some privileges, and Russian-speaking have privileges.
Yeah.
I have to choose maybe Russian. Same. So maybe starting from that time, maybe starting from the early 30s, we can speak of this process of changing the attitude to the Ukrainian language. Not just changing, but it was again the increase of this attitude that I have to speak Russian because it is more prestigious. So Ukrainian is the language of these peasants, of these like poor people. I do not want to be associated with them. Also, very often, if you speak about the Holodomor, it is necessary to we shouldn't underrate the influence of propaganda. And the propaganda of Russian language was huge. And there is also interesting fact that this is not connected with language, but it shows us how the repressions, how this machine was working. In some newspapers, we can find the columns, which is entitled refuse from their parents. So it is said that my name is such and such. I say that my parents are no longer my parents. I don't live with them from that period. I do not want to be associated with them. My parents are kulaks, and I'm the proletarian. So I do not want to be associated. And also sometimes resettlement to the city meant the change of the language. This is huge story of propaganda in the Soviet newspapers. Officially, it was said that there is no famine in the Soviet Union.
Yes.
That they were writing. So in the there are really somehow this is black humor for me. Like they were writing the articles about the Hungary rebellions in London. They were writing about the farmers' resistance in the U.S. They were writing about the problems among Korean farmers. They were saying that that the capitalism is dying. So you see that these are this is the end of capitalism. So the proletarians and the farmers in these countries, they are starving. So you see what they are doing. But they were not writing that the famine is happening under their noses. So officially, sometimes it was referred to as some food difficulties. And also there is the interesting story about covering the Holodomor in the Western world. Speaking about the media, there is the story of several journalists. And there is a story, for example, of Gareth Jones. He is maybe the most popular figure of the journalist who was writing about these events. So he came to Kyiv. So he actually, in his letter, he lied. He said that I want to come to Kyiv to see the results of industrialization, to see the success of the Soviet industrialization. But he came. He didn't come to Kyiv. He got out of the train at some village station, and he saw these facts. He saw these people, and his diary. It is available in the web. In his diary is full of screams like "We are dying! Tell them no bread, no seed, help us!" Something like this. When he returned, so he was shocked. And he sent his dispatches to his. So he was printing his articles in Manchester Guardian. Malcolm Muggeridge. He was printing his articles in Manchester Guardian. He was writing the articles for the New York Times. He was writing these articles, but there was the other journalist. His name was Walter Duranty. He was the special correspondent of the New York Times in Moscow. He was the very famous journalist, a prominent journalist. He was the personal acquaintance of Stalin. He knew him. He created the term Stalinism, for example. But he thought of Stalinism as some fine policies of these people. So there, he thought of these policy as the only possible way of treating so large countries, like the Soviet Union was. He organized, but he actually joined or organized the campaign of bullying Gareth Jones. In his articles, he says that also, I well remember this quote. So there are some food shortages in the country of councils, but there is no famine disaster described by Gareth Jones. In his articles, he blamed him as a liar. And the problem is that Walter Duranty, in 1932, Walter Duranty received the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh wow!
And for his article describing the life in the USSR.
Interesting.
Of course, his voice was much more important than the voice of Gareth Jones, just young journalist. He was like 32 or 33 years old. He was killed later, so when he returned back, so he was Ukraine for several times, and every time he was writing these articles, he organized a press conference where he was speaking of that, but his voice wasn't so loud as the voice of Walter Duranty. Speaking of him, speaking of Gareth Jones, he in 1935 he went to China, to Manchur region. There was genocide as well, and he was killed there. We don't know who killed him, Chinese or Soviets, but he was killed. His family thinks that Soviets killed him. Maybe yes, maybe no, but he was really a prominent journalist. Malcolm Margaret, the other person. A lot of journalists some journalists were writing the articles, but Gareth Jones was the first who mentioned his name under these articles. So journalists probably were also afraid to write of these events, to reveal their names, because this was the professional suicide to contradict the Soviet propaganda. And the majority of the journalists whether remained silent or joined spreading lies. Also, the other story is not about the media, but about the visit. In 1933 or 1934, in 1932 and in 1933, I can't remember exactly when, the ex-Prime Minister of France, Edouard Herriot, came to Ukraine. So Stalin invited him and he came here. In the materials about his visit, we can read that the streets were carefully prepared, all the dead bodies, all the bands of homeless people were removed from the streets. When, nevertheless, if someone of his team or he himself wanted to change the route, he eyewitnessed the facts of the dead bodies, the homeless children. But they decided to. So when he returned back in Geneva, he organized a press conference where he said that this is the best country I have ever visited. He was also shown so-called Potemkin villages, fake villages, where happy collective farm members were collecting large harvests. There is also on YouTube you can find like 30 seconds. 30 seconds chronicle. It is silent, but you can see that everything is perfect. He's happy. Everyone is happy. He saw the shops full of products, not for sale, of course. In each settlement he visited, the feast was organized, and he went back, and he was pretty happy. The media of Ukrainian diaspora were writing about this. The media in Galicia, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, they were writing about these events. Sometimes there were people who managed to cross the border with these countries, who were lucky to cross it and who I witnessed, who were like rescuing
Okay.
from here. They saw and they were writing the articles, or they were giving the interviews.
Okay.
But the voice of Ukrainian diaspora was too silent. It was like really weak.
I see.
It couldn't be compared with the Ukrainian diaspora like during the 70s, 80s, and 90s years of 20th century. It was really strong.
Yeah.
They just emigrated. They didn't have much resource.
Yeah.
They were trying to tell it. Also, we have a lot of the reports of foreign diplomats who were in Ukraine who were writing to their own governments. And the governments knew about these events.
Okay.
But they didn't react. Probably they were afraid just of Stalin.
I see.
So the totalitarian regime. So they decided just to remain silent.
Yeah.
There is also interesting fact that in 1934 there was the discussion of these events in the House of Lords of British Parliament or British government or Parliament. I don't know. So the House of Lords in the UK. But it was 1934. But everything already ended, and the idea was how can we not to let such things repeat again. Just this. So this was not on time.
Yes.
At all.
It was too late.
Yes,
definitely.
and the Western world started to speak of the Holodomor just dozens of years after it, when Ukrainian diaspora was strong, when the voices of the journalists became like louder. Also after the Second World War, when a lot of people emigrated, who managed to emigrate and who are writing about this. But the day, the year when the world, the Western world, as we refer to, got the information about the Holodomor was like middle 80s, when there was the U.S. Commission, U.S. Congress Commission on the famine in Ukraine, and when the book of Robert Conquest called The Harvest of Sorrow was published, and this was the first book printed in English about these events. And this is still a very important book. It is still a very important historical source. Later, James Mays, the head of the Commission on the Genocide Famine, on the Ukraine famine, he also a wonderful person. He in the 80s he immigrated here to Ukraine even, and he said, so this is huge, that your dad chose me, not I chose them, but your dad called me, your dad asked me, and I answered.
I see. Yeah.
The huge thought, and this person also did a lot to spread the information about these events in the world. Nowadays, one of the aims of our museum's work is to spread this information, to share it, because as it is now, not so many people in Ukraine, in the world, know about the Holodomor. So the problem is that we have to spread the information about these events and to ask the governments of the other countries to recognize Holodomor as a genocide. This is the act of historical justice. So we cannot punish the perpetrators because they are dead already.
Yes.
So
but
the God will judge him.
To spread the war,
yes, the God will judge them, but we have to just restore the justice, just to recognize that this was the action against Ukrainians. So in Ukraine, we cannot. So for me, it is difficult to speak about the journalism in the early 30s. This was propaganda, not journalism. So if you are not reporting about the famine,
basically propaganda.
Just because you the aim of the existence of these newspapers and magazine, maybe probably mostly newspapers, was just to make people believe that everything is going well, that we are developing, that we are successful countries, it's nothing bad is happening. So we cannot speak about some independent journalism. There's like it's just some paradox.
I see.
Impossible thing. In the world, yes, it was dangerous. The person needed a huge personal courage to stand up and to speak of these events officially. Especially if we speak about Garjon, so he was the first to sign his name under this article. Because if the article is anonymous, the reader is.
It was not credible enough.
Yes. So like, it's an anonymous article. Is it true? Is it not? It is not. It is not. It is not. So that is why the anonymous article doesn't work. As well, But Garjon's, Malcolm Margaret, other journalists were printing their names, and they were Garjon's even organized the press conference, and Margaret was spoken to the mass media a lot about these events. So they were doing this, but the majority was just safer. It was just more common to remain silent or to spread the official line of the Soviet newspapers. They were not. I cannot say that they were forced to print this propaganda, maybe, but in majority of cases this was just like. So they were not forced like physically as it was in Ukraine. So even the person was forced to do something. In US it was impossible, but they were just this.
I see.
The responsibility. This is about the personal responsibility of the media. The journal. Also, one more thing, that these events were covered in a huge way. That these people were. What I was planning to speak about. A wonderful mind visited my head, but there was empty house inside.
Yeah, it's alright.
I would say no, because the aim of the Holodomor was to suppress the resistance. The main effect of the Holodomor is fear. So you're afraid of your physical life, and that is why people who are trying to who are getting to the city, who are moving to the city, they were changing their language to Russian. So the resistance, there could have been no resistance in Ukraine, I would say, to the Russian language. So these people were prepared. So they were. It's difficult. If you speak about the linguistic, the resistance in terms of language, how could they? They were learning Russian at school. Even if this was Ukrainian school, they were forced to study Russian. A bit later, for example, this is the memory of my parents, especially in the village schools. For example, if I recall, the Thursday was the Russian-speaking day, and all people during the pauses, during the study process, they have to use Russian language. And for example, so this was the private memory of my dad, and he is from the village, the small village. Everyone is speaking Ukrainian. He still speaks Russian with accent. But he at school he was forced to, one day a week he was forced to speak Russian because it was Russian-speaking day. But this was like his the end of the 70s, early 80s.
I see.
50 years later. But. So the resistance, the powerful resistance, was suppressed by the Holodomor. And so people were. This is the also important thing, that how the genocide worked. These people were fighting in the Red Army.
I see.
In the communist army, actually.
Okay.
Of course, we can. Someone says that the people were not fighting for communism; they were fighting against Nazism. But I think that these people barely realize what the Nazism or fascism is.
Yeah.
So probably they were just doing what they were told to. And that's all.
Yeah.
If we speak about the general political process, so there was the Ukrainian rebel army during the Second World War, and it covered not only the western part of Ukraine, but a lot of the territories in the central part of Ukraine, in the eastern part of Ukraine as well. So these people were just had this nationalist ideology. So they believed in Ukraine. So nationalism is nothing to do with Nazism. So people, as I see, the people in Europe, they are afraid of the term nationalism. It's okay to be nationalist, especially if you have the enemy nearby. The Second World War, and afterwards there was the resistance movement of intelligentsia in 60s and 70s and 80s. They were called dissidents, and this is the dissident movement.
Okay.
So this was a few generations after. So, for example, here we see the photo of the person, the Holodomor survivor, Ilko Koronets.
Yes.
He died a few months ago, but he's the person with a strong courage, and he was the professor in Kyiv Linguistic University, and he had. As he was the professor, he was an intelligent man, and he well realized who committed the Holodomor, why did they committed it, and he was using Ukrainian and Ukrainian only, and his students recall that he was one of the most that he was one of the professors who was fighting for the Ukraine, for everything Ukrainian, more than other professors. But these people, many of them lived in fear. Many of them, if we speak about the survivors, so the first interviews with the survivors, they happened in the immigration environment in the U.S. So those who immigrated, and many of them still were afraid to tell their real names. They were using pseudonyms.
Okay.
Even in the late 90s, late 80s.
Late 80s. Okay.
As the same was happening here in Ukraine. During this, the largest campaign of collecting the information about the Holodomor was during the process of recognition of the Holodomor as a genocide in Ukraine. So I'd say the early 21st century, until the 2008, 2009. So this was the most important period. So when, for example, our museum was opened in 2009.
Okay.
And a lot of them were still afraid. A lot of them were asking, will I be safe if I tell you all this?
Yeah.
Still, nowadays I'd say that most of them are not afraid. Now they realize that they are living in a independent country. Now they are trying to speak to their descendants, to their children, to their. In the terms of language, many of them use most of them use Ukrainian because this is their native language. Most of them lived in the village, in the rural area. They preferred Ukrainian. I'd say that the process of using Ukrainian language as their resistance to the use of Russian language is more about the generations after. For them, it was natural to speak Ukrainian.
Yes. Okay.
It was the resistance.
Yeah.
But after the Russification, the choice of Ukrainian language was the political choice.
I see.
Afterwards, because the Ukrainian was suppressed, the Ukrainian was weak, the Ukrainian was not prestigious.
Yeah.
To choose, for example, in the case of the universities, the teachers of Russian had higher salaries than the teachers of Ukrainian.
I see.
For example, if you teach Russian, your class is 15 people maximum. If you teach Ukrainian, your class is 30 people maximum.
Yes.
Of course, it is better to teach 15 people than teach 13 school children. And that is why a lot of people preferred, if there was the choice whether to choose to be the teacher, to study Ukrainian language and literature at the university, or to study Russian Ukrainian literature, Russian literature and language. Of course, a lot of them chosen Russian. To choose the Ukrainian was to choose that was the actual kind of political choice, because you agree that you'll be weekend, that you'll be like weaker than the teacher of Russian, for example. You agree that the conditions for you will be much worse. Also, all the dissertations, all these candidates, theses, PhD in the Western world, all these PhD theses, they were written in Russian. And this is funny that the papers on Ukrainian language and literature were written in Russian as well.
Interesting.
So that was like very strange. How can you write, for example, the work on Ukrainian phonology in Russian?
Yes.
But it was compulsory. All the theses should have been in Russian.
I see. So it's still the dominance of and manipulation of Russian. Okay.
And there was, but I'd say that for the Holodomor survivors, this was not. So for them, it was normal to speak Ukrainian. It was like they were suffering for being Ukrainian. They were suffering for the Ukrainian language, but they were not thinking of it as something what makes them weak.
Yes.
The next generation were thinking. So their descendants, some of them were brought up in this idea that I'm Ukrainian, that I have to speak Ukrainian, I must speak Ukrainian.
Yes.
But sometimes when the person moved to the city, they preferred Russian, and so this was, and for many of them, as I said, the language is connected with policy. In totalitarian society in the USSR, it was connected.
Yeah.
During the Holodomor, Crimean Peninsula wasn't a part of the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic.
Okay,
So it was a part of Russian Federative Socialist Soviet Republic.
Okay.
The other part of the Soviet Union. There was a genocide committed against the Crimean Tatars during the 40s. So you know the story that they were settled from their own home from Crimean Peninsula. In 1944, they were moved to Siberia, to Kazakhstan, to Uzbekistan, to other parts of the Soviet Union. They were called to. So, but speaking about them. I'd say that a lot of the process of Russification was happening everywhere in all Soviet republics. Everywhere. So the Russian was so people were thinking of Russian as the language of international communication. So not English but Russian, because we live in the Soviet Union. Our language is Russian. And that is why this is a very interesting way of creating the common space, common cultural space, because everyone understands Russian.
Yes.
And we can create films, we can movies, we can create books, we can create all these mass culture. All these things, and everyone will understand.
Yes.
So that will be the common space. And for example, if you speak Ukrainian, only 23 or 30 million people will understand you, depending on. But if you speak Russian, several hundred million people will understand you. All the Soviet Union will understand you.
Yes.
And just this way. first famine occurred, not occurred, but was implemented, occurred, not the right way, not the right word. The first famine was organized in 1921-1923.
Okay.
This was so Lenin organized this famine.
Okay.
It touched the southern part of Ukraine mostly.
Okay.
Its first cause is precondition. One of its preconditions was mass drought.
Okay.
So harvest was destroyed. In some districts there was no harvest completely.
Okay.
Because there was no rain for a large period of time, and there was no harvest. Ukraine, the other parts of Ukraine were able to trade with them, and so Ukraine was able to help their starving co-citizens in the southern part of Ukraine. But at the same time, the famine was happening in Lower Volga region.
Okay.
And all Ukrainian farmers, including the farmers of the territories which suffered from this drought as well, they were forced to collect their famine relief aid to the farmers of Lower Volga region.
Okay, I see.
So everyone was helping starving farmers in Lower Volga region. There was this famine. The specific feature of this one famine is that it wasn't forbidden to be spoken about. Dislike the Holodomor of 1932-33 and the Holodomor of 1946-47. Also, we use the term Holodomor. Sometimes we use it. Sometimes it is used for describing the famine of 1921-1923 and the famine of 1946-1947 as well. But this is the difference. Big H is the famine of 1932-33. Small H is about these two ones, but it is better to use the famines and
So the first famine actually, as you mentioned, it was allowed to be spoken about because it was due to natural causes.
Yes,
right?
it was not so. It was 1921, 1923. It was the very beginning of the existence of the Soviet Union. So it was not so huge totalitarian state as it was in the early 30s. It was a different political system.
I see.
So it was the country of terror. It was the country of repressions. The policy of military communism implemented in 1919 with the huge destruction of many people. But this famine, it was not. These two famines are not the genocide.
Yes.
So they are caused by. They have some other conditions except the political ones. So they are politically organized.
Yes.
So they are the man-made famines. But they are one of the causes of each of them is not just the policy, but other preconditions. For example, the drought in 1921-1923, and the post-war chaos in 1946-1947. But they were man-made because Ukrainians were able to trade. Because there is interesting that there was no famine in Ukrainian history until the 20th century. No famine at all. Sometimes there were the droughts, the harvest was poor, and the products were expensive. But this was maximum. Famine that led to the death of millions of people never happened. But if you speak about the 20th century, about the Soviet period of Ukrainian history, three famines, millions of people destroyed. This was huge. So Stalin also there is also not a very right thing to say, because it is sometimes it is said that Lenin once said that to make Ukrainians calm, to keep them calm, you have to make them starve every 10 years. Like 21, 23, 32, 33, 46, 47. Like this was the war because it was a bit postponed.
I see.
But so this was the private quote, so it wouldn't be referred to as some official policy.
Interesting. And I guess from what I now understand, Yes, now talking specifically about Holodomor, so it was not an act of the high authorities taking all this food to help other people in other USSR republics, but it was an act of subjugation, an act of punishment, because they thought Ukrainians were going to be a systematic problem for the USSR and the different republics.
And they actually were. Despite the Holodomor, they were still the problem for until the end, until the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it was not. During the 1932-1933, there was enough bread in the stores of the USSR. So they had enough bread. They were still exporting bread.
Yeah. Wow.
So if it is such famine, if it was for natural famine, or if it was not for the genocide, if it wasn't for genocidal policy, these people would have just decreased the number or the amount of wheat exported, just stop selling it and help your farmers. But you are just you are selling it abroad, and you are exporting it, and you are saying that everything is okay to the rest of the world. So we are building the prosperous society.
Yeah.
So this was actually just this way.
Yeah.
First of all, the genocide should have never happened again. This is first and foremost. Second of all, you must learn about the Holodomor, about the genocide of Ukrainian nation, to understand what totalitarian regime is, what the communism is, and how to prevent it. This is the personal choice of everyone, whether to spread lies, to spread propaganda, or to analyze and to spread the truth. So this is, and that is why the Holodomor was about the personal choice, to join the victims or to join the perpetrators, to spread propaganda or to write down the truth, to help someone or to confiscate bread. And even in the totalitarian society, of course, for making the right choice, you would be punished. Of course, you would be the victim of this terror. But it is necessary. It is necessary to foreign society to understand that what totalitarian communist occupational Bolshevik regime was, what they done to Ukraine, and also if I had the possibility to ask the governors of the foreign countries, this is the question of historical justice, to recognize Holodomor as the genocide. This is very important, to spread this information and to recognize it at official level. Just this way, two things everyone can do.
All right.
This is one of the artifacts of the early 30s of the Holodomor period. This is actually the hand mill. This is not the mill normally used in Ukrainian household. This is the invention of the early 30s. It is interesting. It is the hand mill used for grinding grains of wheat or corn into flour. But it is interesting because it is fixed into places only. It means that it is very easy to be uninstalled. So very often this mill was kept in uninstalled state because the communist authorities were confiscating the millstones and the mills as well. To be able to process the wheat or the corn the person had hidden somehow, they just used this kind of mill. It was kept in uninstalled state, and from these single details, the person wasn't able to guess that this was actually the mill. So when the brigade came into the house, they were not able to understand that this is the meal, so they didn't confiscate it.
Okay.
This is the house tool, the millstones used in Ukrainian household. They work just this way, but the millstones were forbidden to be used during the Holodomor. People trying to survive were grinding not just wheat, because the wheat was confiscated. They were grinding some other natural supplies, non-edible surrogates, like for example the bark of trees or the ears of corn, using the millstones. But the Soviet Union activists were confiscating the millstones as well, not to let people any chance to survive using this house tool. Here we have 18 volumes of National Book of Memory. Each volume represents a certain region of Ukraine which suffered from the Holodomor, and this is the book devoted to Zaporizhia region of Ukraine, and this is the southern part of Ukraine. Each book has the same structure. The first part of each book is the martyrology. It is the list of the Holodomor victims whose name we know now. These lists are pretty short. They include only 900,000 names, comparing with the general number of the Holodomor victims, which is 7 to 10 million. This is surely not enough. But we are still working on this list. We are still working with the documents, with the survivors, with our visitors. We ask them to tell us the names of their dead, of their ancestors killed by the Holodomor, and if they are not included in this list, people are able to fill their card, and we include this name in our electronic register. This list will never be. We will never be able to name all the Holodomor victims, to name everyone. In the medical documents of that time, it was forbidden to write down the cause of the death as famine. It was written as exhaustion, as some infectional diseases, and as some psychical problems. And also a lot of death registration books for the years 1933 were removed from Ukrainian registry offices, and we don't know what happened to these books. If maybe they are kept somewhere in classified stores, but probably they were destroyed during the early 30s or during the Second World War. It is now unknown. That is why the majority of these lists are completed according to the documents and according to the people who survived the Holodomor, who recall the names of their dead friends, relatives, neighbors. People tell us these, the survivors tell us these names, and we complete the lists. The books include also the documents which show us the repressions in a certain region of Ukraine. And the last part of each book are the testimonies of people who survived the Holodomor. They are really interesting private oral stories, and they are important to be read because the death of the killing, the murder of 7 million people is just the statistics. But the killing of a certain person is the tragedy, and these private stories remind us of that. This place is called the Altar of Memory. It is the central part of our museum, and this is the place of symbolic commemoration of people who are killed by the Holodomor, by the man-made famine of 1932-1933. Behind the glass we see the grains of wheat, the most important thing for Ukrainians of all times, and we cannot count how many grains are here. As well, we cannot count how many people were killed during the Holodomor. But according to the latest researches, the number of the Holodomor victims is 7 to 10 million people. It was 1/4 to 1/3 part of the Ukrainian population. Also, here you can see the candles. They remind us of Ukrainian tradition. On the Holodomor Remembrance Day, this is the last Saturday of November, we light the candles and put them near the windows. We call them the candles of remembrance. And if someday in your native country you will see people lighting the candles, probably this is Ukrainian diaspora commemorating the Holodomor victims, because this is always the day which unites Ukrainians living in Ukraine and abroad. Also, on on these walls of the altar we can see the ornaments typical for Ukrainian embroidery, but they are not colorful. They are just gray, and this reminds us of the destruction of the Ukrainian culture. So the Holodomor led to the destruction of many Ukrainian traditions, customs, and our ornaments to symbolize it. Also over the altar you can see this metal construction. It reminds us of Ukrainian tradition. On Christmas Eve we make so-called spiders from straw, so such figures from straw, and if these spiders are moving by the wind, it is said that the destinies, the souls of our dead ancestors came to visit us, came to join us, and this symbolizes just the destinies of just the souls of the people who were killed by the Holodomor. So this is a huge spider because millions of people were killed by these events. On the screen you can see the photos. These are the mass graves of the Holodomor victims. So they are, we don't know how many people are buried there, but all we know is that these photos were taken at the beginning, in 1932 by Austrian engineer Alexander Wienerberger, who at that time was in Kharkiv. He had a camera with him, and he secretly did these photos. He sent them by Austrian diplomatic post. It is uncensored, and this is the way these photos appeared in Vienna. At the end of the 1930s, they were published by Vienna Public Library. Speaking about the mass graves of the Holodomor victims, as I said, we cannot tell the exact location of these mass graves, because the Soviet Union had the practice of destroying the mass graves in order to destroy the memory of these events. Over the mass graves, they were often building stadiums, parks of entertainment, children's playgrounds, houses of culture, other buildings, and people, the next generation, didn't remember of the events that were occurring here during the 1932-1933. The other photos taken by Wienerberger show us the Holodomor victims on the streets of Kharkiv, on the streets of prosperous, actually, as it was written in newspapers, Soviet Republic. We see the dead or half-life people lying on the streets of the capital city, and no one is paying attention. So here we see the group gathering round. Here we can see people just passing by it and not even paying attention. But these photos, but we must understand that the same situation was happening in each village, in each city of Ukraine. Speaking about villages, the situation there was a bit different. Very often the collective farms organized some kind of wagon which was going along the streets and collecting the dead bodies, which were thrown into the large pit at the cemetery afterwards. But sometimes there were even no people to collect these bodies, and they were just lying on the streets. They were lying in the empty houses. Sometimes the relatives were too exhausted to carry the bodies to the cemetery, and they were burying them near their houses, in the gardens. And unfortunately, these are the graves people forget, first of all. If you speak about the mass graves, the large of them, sometimes people remember of these mass graves, and our museum has created the map. Our museum has created the map. And sometimes people were too exhausted to carry their dead friends, relatives to the cemeteries. They were burying them near their houses, in the gardens. In order to recover the memory of the mass graves and of these small graves, our museum has created the interactive map. geoinformational system of mass graves of the Holodomor victims. It is available on our website. Now we have the information about 1,000 places of mass burials. This is not enough. We are still working on that. We are still collecting the information on the mass graves, on the Holodomor memorials and monuments over these mass graves. As for me, this is also one of the most important ways to preserve the memory of these events.
1932 році невеликий проте невпинний потік статей почав з'являтися в канадській пресі, не тільки що допомогли Україні, на той час частині Союзу Радянських Соціалістичних Республік. В усьому світі прихильники режиму та їхньої ідеології бажали зобразити там параметри робітників, що розвивається, та відкидати репортажі як антикомуністичну пропаганду. Нечисленні журналісти, випільники і дипломати стверджували, що було фактично спричинені саме радянським впливом з політичних причин. Незабаром після цього, у 1933 році, Великий Голод досяг свого страшного апогею. Той факт, що в Україні був масовий голод, не обговорювався. Що обговорювалося, так це масштаб трагедії та її причини. Мільйони людей померли з голоду, спричиненого непосухою або масовим врожаєм, та цілеспрямованою політикою радянського уряду. Програма знищення була спрямована на населення України та українську націю за прямою вказівкою Йосифа Сталіна, лідера Комуністичної партії Радянського Союзу. Суперечливі підрахунки катастрофи швидко вицвіли на тлі світових новин, і їхнє місце зайняли інші історії. Півстоліття минуло у фактичному мовчанні. Починаючи з 1980 року, в усьому світі українські мігранти та їхні діти почали відроджувати правду. Вони зібрали в одне ціле історію геноциду, організованого в політичних цілях, як масове порушення фундаментальних прав людини та несподіваної ролі журналістської відповідальності. Закон, ухвалений парламентом України у 2006 році, визнав цей голод геноцидом, навмисно скоєним радянською Росією. У 2008 році керівництво Канади вийшло зі своїм власним визнанням геноциду. Він став відомим як Голодомор. Як могла історія Голодомору замовчуватися і приховуватися від світу так довго? У Радянському Союзі 1930-х років справжня природа голоду була відома багатьом, але її приховували уданими дезінформації, заперечень і погроз. Журналістські посвідчення, доступ, навіть їхні візи скасовувалися, аби завадити будь-які публікації, що суперечили радянському режиму. На Заході сприйняття голоду було частково сформовано впливовим голосом Нью-Йорк Таймс, зокрема спеціальним кореспондентом газети в Радянському Союзі, лауреатом багатьох премій, репортером Уолтером Дюранті. Тоді, як мільйони померли з голоду, Дюранті, радянський симпатик, відправляв додому депеші, яких перетворював на банальність масштаби і причини голоду, стверджуючи, що хоча може й мали місце деякі випадки зі смертельними наслідками, більшість з них були спричинені хворобами, викликаними недоїданням. Приватно, Дюранті відкрито визнавав, що мільйони людей в Україні помирали з голоду, але в своїх статтях він спотворював правду. Він навіть дійшов до того, що поклав частину провини на самих українців, стверджуючи, що вони запекло опиралися планом радянської влади. Він писав те, що хотів Радянський Союз – історію про успішну націоналізацію сільського господарства. Починаючи з 1928 року, приватні господарства були конфісковані, а після колективно засіяні і зжаті. Власність, контроль і розподіл в сільському господарстві були тепер повністю в руках держави. Проте ця політика зустріла запеклий опір українців, які бажали незалежності від радянського контролю. Дрібні землевласники були визнані негідними довіри і розглядалися як загроза радянського панування. Сталін хотів усунути цю загрозу. Він хотів їх вирішити. Кожному сільськогосподарському колективу встановлювався план. Кількість зерна, яку належало здати державі до того, як члени колективу могли отримати щонебудь на себе. Плани були завищені. Майже неможливо було їх виконати. Зрив виконання або випадки опору певному регіону означали доєднання штрафів і покарань, які неминуче працювали на фільмові грошом ворожі. З метою забезпечення повної послуги Сталін замінив місцевих лідерів чиновниками покірними несамованих голодом людей заполонили сільську місцевість.
У нас казали гарба. Такий ліс глибокий. То які м'які були, вони вимоги такі, які дирали і кидали. То як вже чули, що їде та гарба, то тікали, хто ще сили мав, то ліс десь під корчак, під дерево чи щось. Бо якщо вони скажуть, забирай, ми не будемо за ними коли раз вертатися.
У самий розпал змови мовчання і заперечення, що супроводжували розвиток, який зростав, були голоси, що намагалися розкрити правду. Серед них є журналістів із об'єднаного королівства Малкольм Малевич і Perea, які вирішили самостійно дослідити вражену зону восени 1932 і взимку 1933 років. Вони зіткнулися з голодуючими селянами, які шикувалися вздовж залізниці в надії, що їм кинуть скоринного хліба. Новизна цього конкретного ворога і основний документ, я маю на увазі власне, що зробили настільки діяльності, це те, що він не був результатом доведеної катастрофи, як то засуха або щось подібне, чи навіть епідемії. Це було навмисне породження бюрократичного розуму, що вимагало негайної колективізації сільського господарства як суто теоретичним проєктом, без будь-якого розгляду можливих наслідків у стражданнях людей. Кордони України були закриті, ніякої їжі не дозволялося завозити до визначених областей. Переміщатися за межі власного району, щоб знайти їжу, було заборонено. Їжу, яку хтось намагався принести своїм родинам з поза межах страждалих регіонів, конфісковували на кордонах. І оскільки держава перекрила будь-який доступ, жодна гуманітарна організація не могла надати чи надіслати допомоги або полегшити страждання. Коментатор Малкольм Малевич знав, що коли його статті будуть опубліковані, він більше не зможе перебувати як репортер в Радянському Союзі і планував покинути країну перш ніж його опублікують. Щоб уникнути цензуру з боку радянської держави, він домовився, аби його повідомлення на закладі відправили для з радянської дипломатичної пошти. Проте, за словами Малевича, Гарден значно редагував його статті, щоб привести їх у відповідність з офіційною радянською версією. Коли Гарду Джонсу вдалося опублікувати свої статті на Бога, це викликало негативну реакцію. Його вчинок заперечував твердження Лютера Дюранті, кореспондента New York Times і радянського клубу. Джонс сказав: «Я пройшов селами 12 області. Скрізь стояв хліб. Немає хліба, ми вмираємо». Дюранті та подібні йому, можливо, з радянської підтримки, зафарбували Джонса як трибуна. Його авторитет було зруйновано. Сам Джонс, як і Малевич, зацькований своїми колегами, не могли більше займатися журналістикою у себе на Батьківщині. Повна історія Голодомору залишалася невідомою протягом півстоліття. радянський уряд продовжував свою кампанію приховування, заперечуючи та применшуючи геноцид протягом 50 років, аж до самого початку руйнування СРСР у 80-х роках. У результаті мільйони людей були піддані повільній смерті в той час, як більша частина світової преси цікавилась іншим, або співпрацювала поширеній брехні. Попри мужність, Марковича, Джонса та інші не змогли ні зупинити Голодомор, ні завадити таємності, що тривала десятиліттями навколо. Журналісти мають право викривати або приховувати. Величезну роботу з привернення уваги до злочинів проти людяності, які відбуваються в авторитарних і закритих суспільствах, несе величезний ризик. Якою є роль і які обов'язки ЗМІ у формуванні громадської думки щодо грубих порушень прав людини? У міру розвитку соціальних медіа і збільшення доступності технологій, який ефект і надійність нових джерел інформації, що надходить безпосередньо від громадян? Що ми можемо зробити як особистості, як спільнота, як нація для гарантування того, що геноциди, такі як Голодомор, ніколи не повторяться?
Пережили голод, пережили війну. Дай Боже тільки, щоб наші діти не знали таких страждань.
Every time we experience or hear about horrific events in human history, such as the Holodomor or death by starvation, as the Ukrainians refer to it, we say, never again. Let us learn from these events so that in future generations no one will suffer the injustice of human evil. Ukrainians have suffered intensely to a point that most of their people could have been annihilated. Attacks by the Soviet regime on people's identity, culture, traditions, religion, language, and their intelligentsia or intellectual knowledge were unacceptable. Just as my colleague Tetyana mentioned, let us spread the word of what happened in Ukraine, of the genocide perpetuated against our Ukrainian sisters and brothers. Let other governments know what happened here, and let us never ever allow this again. May God bless Ukraine and all the innocent souls who perish under this regime. May they all rest in peace.
Собой, улыбайся рассветом и уверенным шагом вперед, навстречу весеннему ветру. Жизнь прекрасна, смотри, сколько лучиков светлых вокруг, океаны любви и улыбка, что дарит друг. Солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи и дыши и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. Каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. Даже плодят по сердцу обильно. Есть на свете родимый дом, где поймут, а ведь любят так сильно. Рядом пусть будет та, для которой ты смысл и счастье. Нежным взглядом она защитит от беды ненастья. Пусть солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи, дыши и люби, и каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. И каждый, кто дорог, пусть рядом остается. Пусть солнце лучистое в душе твоей разольется, пусть небо прозрачно чистое синевою к сердцу прикоснется. Ты просто живи